Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another video. My name is Juan Londoño and I'm really excited about this video. Today's topic will be to filter or not to filter. That is the question. A few things before we get started. So by filter, I'm not talking about those fancy software filters that we see on applications like, the social media applications like Instagram and all the others, right? Snapchat and so forth, where we look cute or we look scary or we look all types of different things. Not talking about those filters here. We're talking about the kind of filters you put on a photographic lens, like a camera lens. These can be either square or round, and they basically go at the tip of the lens, at the end of the lens, not the tip of the lens. And they can be used for effects, or they can just be used to protect the lens. I want to start by discussing three levels of photography. The very basic, the person who's just buying a camera for the first time or doesn't know a whole lot. The amateur that's, been using it for a little while, and then the professional. So there's going to be a general flow, right, for these photographers, and it goes something like this. For a beginner that's just getting into photography, they may not even know what a filter is. And if they do, if they've heard of them, if they've seen other people use them, they might not care. I have found, in dealing with people who have been doing photography for a little while, like the amateurs, that they kind of fall into two categories. And it's the, either the I don't really care about filters, or I don't want to spend any money on filters. That's the first category. Or filters are the most important thing in the world for the lens, and all of my lenses have filters. And it's kind of the two extremes. That's what I've seen, whether it's people I've taught here at the house or just people I've met. And if you're a professional, then you find yourself in a different category here in this little flow of things for filters. And it's that you understand the importance of filters. You probably have, for the most part, good lenses. Money is not an issue, probably, especially if you're making good money off of your photography. But for professional photographers, it's more about image quality, and we'll get into that. This is the time where we take a water break. My water bottle is full. I'm happy. And go get yourself some beverage of your choice that you like, and come back and meet us here. That is my water break. Getting back to the video. So keep this in mind as well, guys. You've probably heard the comment before that opinions are like buttholes. Everybody's got one, right? And that includes me. So when I tell you these things, these are not, I don't want you to take it the wrong way, right? If I get comments that say, I disagree with you, I don't see why I have to do this, then you probably didn't understand the point of the video. Because the point of the video is just kind of like advice, right? A tip, a suggestion, right? A thought. I'm in no way telling anybody to do any of these things. The whole purpose of this video is to open your mind to see why maybe myself and other photographers are and aren't using filters, and then you can come up with your own decision as to whether you will invest in filters, if you're going to invest in good or cheap filters, or just leave them out altogether. With that in mind, tip number one, let's start with the beginners. If you're a beginner, my suggestion, and it's a very mild suggestion, is that you keep a filter on your lens all the time. Now, why would I say that? There's got to be a reason, right? First of all, I've been a beginner, right? And I always had a filter on my camera. When you're a beginner photographer, you're getting comfortable manipulating the camera, playing around with the lenses, taking one off, putting another one on, and you end up touching them in places where they're not supposed to be touched. So putting a filter on one end is not a bad idea. The other thing is, many of us have kids. If it's not our own kids, it's nephews and nieces and whatever the case may be, right? And because this equipment is new to us, we're not used to having it around. We usually keep things around. We may accidentally leave the camera around, and kids touch them. And when kids grab cameras, there's no place on the camera they won't touch. They'll touch every corner of the camera. So you need a filter if that's the situation, right? One other reason why I suggest a filter is because when you're carrying this camera hanging from you and you lean forward to do something, to grab a plate of food, the camera bangs into the table, it bangs into the walls, it bangs into everything really. And if you have a filter at the end of that lens, it's going to help protect it. The last one here that is not so obvious is understanding climate variations. Many times you'll be shooting outside and you come inside and your lenses and camera and everything starts getting all foggy and full of moisture. If you have that filter at the end, well, that's what's going to get foggy and full of moisture, and it'll be one layer of protection for your lens. So whether you are a beginner with an expensive camera or expensive lenses or cheap gear, it doesn't matter. Until you get comfortable maneuvering and manipulating these things, just put a lens on, put a filter on it. Going to the cheap gear first, if you are a beginner and you bought a used camera or a very simple camera that doesn't have anything expensive on it, the lens may even be a fixed lens, you don't need an expensive filter, right? Like, for example, I have a lens on the camera that I'm filming, right? I have a small pancake lens. It's a wonderful lens, by the way. It's a 22mm f2. And that's not what I'm filming with right now, but I use that lens for everything. And when I use the camera for street photography, I take that with me. It's the equivalent of a 35mm lens, because this is a crop sensor. So when I'm using that lens, the filters that I put on it are inexpensive. As a matter of fact, I have a good brand filter on that lens. It's a $200 to $300 lens, but the filter's worth 50 bucks. And I don't want to spend more than that on that lens because the fidelity of that lens isn't higher. If I spend any more than that, it's going to be overkill, right? So the filter I have on there is protecting it, it's keeping it clean, and it does the job. If you're a beginner and you have expensive gear, you went ahead and said, you know what, I'm the kind of person that likes to have good things. I side with you, by the way. I understand that. I'm very much that way too. And you have a nice lens, or you have a really good camera with a lens, whatever it is, then my recommendation is that you keep a filter on it, because you're still getting used to playing around with everything, maneuvering everything. The kids, everything we talked about, right? So until you get very comfortable and experienced, you want to have a filter on that camera to protect that lens. I typically use B+W, and there's another brand I use. I'll put those links in the description. I like to use good filters. You don't want that to take away from your images, right? So if you have a good lens, put a good filter on it if you can. And remember, not always in life, but many, many, many times, you get what you pay for. Now we're going to tip number 2, which is for amateurs. People that have been playing around with photography for a little while. They might not be pros, but they understand what's going on, and they already know the terms and the things that are available for the cameras, right? So these folks know what a filter is, and they fall into 2 categories, right? Really, depending on their knowledge of photography and how much they actually care. If they don't really care, then it doesn't matter what equipment they have, how expensive or cheap it is. If they don't care about filters, because some people don't, then there's no point discussing it. They're not going to put a filter on the camera. There are people that are frugal, and that's a nice way of saying cheap, right? And if that's the case, then these folks aren't going to buy a filter either, because it's money they can save and spend on something else. But quite a few of these amateur photographers will understand that if they have good gear, and even if they don't have good gear, maybe they go out into the rain and dirt and all that stuff, they want to put a filter at the end of their lens. So my advice to an amateur photographer is, if you have a lens like that lens I mentioned, that little pancake lens that isn't very expensive, it's up to you whether you want to put a filter on it or not, right? That's entirely up to you. If you have, however, an expensive lens, I would still go ahead and put a filter on it. And again, we go back to, if you have an expensive lens, you don't want to take away from that image quality, so it needs to be a good quality filter. For people that have cheap lenses, I have a couple of them, like I have a 15mm 1.8, what they call the Nifty 50 for my EF mount for Canon. Great freaking lens. I love, love, love that lens. And the filter I have on it probably isn't worth more than 50 bucks. It's also a B+W, and it does the job, right? It doesn't take away from image quality. I've used it with and without the filter, and then I've gotten close up in my computer, and I can't tell the difference, right? But let me tell you what happens when you go too cheap. I've seen people go so cheap with their filters. Like you can buy a filter for $8.99 American dollars. When you go with that solution, I've heard people tell me that their camera wasn't focusing properly, and then when they replaced the filter with a better filter, they had no focusing problem. So imagine your filter being so cheap and poor quality that your camera has trouble looking through it and focusing properly. That's not a good idea. At that point, you are protecting your lens, right? And you're sacrificing completely your image quality. What you want to do, it's a balance, right? It doesn't need to be, we're going to talk about that. But if you want to spend a little, you don't want to spend too much, you're going to have to sacrifice something, right? You don't want to get the cheapest, but if you get something that's, you know, so-so, then you're going to lose a little bit of image quality and you have good protection, right? The more you spend, the less you have to worry about sacrificing your image quality. If you're an amateur and you're comfortable handling your equipment and you have a routine down in terms of taking off lenses and putting on, you know, different lenses, and you have all that figured out, you know, you don't have to put a filter on it, right? It's up to you. But again, if the lens is really, really expensive, then you're going to think about it twice because there's a lot of money at stake. Now, tip number 3 is for professional photographers, and this one is a little trickier. You see, most professional photographers have very high quality glass, most of them. And the biggest question for a professional photographer becomes, do I sacrifice image quality or not? If I put a filter on it, then I may sacrifice some of the image quality. So what I find is that many professional photographers have these really expensive lenses and they refuse to put filters on them. And that's a decision they make. But let me tell you something, and I can whisper this because I don't want other professional photographers to hear me. All professional photographers don't know everything, including myself. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it used to be back in the day when all this was getting started, filters were kind of crappy. Filters were an afterthought. They were really there to protect the lens and that first element, and they try to make them okay, but nobody put rocket science into these things, right? As lenses have become more high quality, filter manufacturers have had to step up the game as well, right? So, for example, I have a Fujifilm camera that shoots with 102 megapixels. It's a medium format. Actually, they call it a large format sensor, right? The lenses for that camera start at about $2K each. One of my lenses, which I absolutely love, is a $2,800 lens, and it stays on that camera all the time. Now, do I get a filter for that, or do I not? If it's going to sacrifice image quality, I don't want it, right? So the first thing I did was I got the best filter that I can get for that lens. And it was not an expensive filter, it was about 200 bucks. So for an almost $3,000 lens, that's not a bad thing to do, right? And then what I did was I put this filter on and I started shooting things up close and even far. And then I took the filter off and I did the same. And I looked in my computer, and to tell you the truth, I could not find the difference. The camera had no issue focusing in either situation. So I'm very happy with that filter, and that filter is staying on that lens because I don't mind the extra protection. But if I had bought a $40 or $50 filter for that lens, it probably would have taken away, especially at the edges, right? A little sharpness. And if that's the case, you know, I didn't buy a 102 megapixel camera to get blurry pictures. It's not going to happen, right? So I understand why some photographers are apprehensive about putting filters on their lenses. They still think that filters are kind of shitty glass, afterthought glass, but a lot of manufacturers, including B+W and Hoya, makes good filters, and so many companies make good filters now, but you have to step up to the higher end, right? They're putting a lot of research into their glass, and these filters are specially coated for all kinds of things, right? For glare, and so they're not taken away in any, from your pictures in any way. This is the camera that I was telling you about, right? It's my Fujifilm camera. Let me put it up here so you can kind of see it, right? So make sure it focuses my face again, good. So this one right now, it's got a 32-64, and let me show you what this has. This has a made in Germany, a B+W XS Pro Digital. So it's got a filter. If you look at it, let's see, is it gonna focus? Come on. It's got a filter, right? So I'm not just saying this for the sake of recording a video. It's something that I take very serious. I care for my glass, so I protect it, and what I protect it with needs to be a good quality filter because that glass is extremely sharp. These lenses for this camera are amazingly sharp. I mean, I look at the pictures on my computer and I still can't believe it, and I've had this camera for a couple of months now. I'm still in shock when I look at the pictures. So you know, I'm not going to sacrifice on cheap filters, and you shouldn't either. So going back to professional photographers, if you know what you're doing, right? You've been around the block and you tend to be careful with your stuff. I'm very careful with my equipment now, right? I baby my equipment, I keep it clean. I take it to be maintained every couple of years, every 2 years. If you're like this and you're soft-handed, and you know, if you choose to leave the filter off and you're not shooting in adverse weather conditions, that's probably okay, right? If you're going to be shooting in rain, snow, if it gets too cold, you don't want that dampness in your lens, then you want to put a filter on it. If you have rough hands, if you want, and you know who you are, if you're one of those people that breaks everything you touch, then put a filter on it. Just remember what we mentioned, right? Just like filters have coatings, lenses, the lenses you have on your camera have very special coatings, and companies spend probably millions of dollars over their span researching the different coatings that they can put on these lenses and how they work, right? I know for example, because I've used Canon for so many years, that they take it extremely serious. I'm sure every company does, right? And it's for, you know, what are these coatings for? Well, they minimize glare when you're looking into the sun at some point, right? They minimize diffraction when you have that lens closed down to like f/16, f/22, f/32. And certainly chromatic aberration, where those funky colors start getting introduced, right? When you open up the lens a little. So those coatings are very special. Now, you can damage those coatings just by rubbing the lens the wrong way. Sounds kind of funny, right? You rubbed me the wrong way. And you can damage those coatings by cleaning the lens with improper materials, right? So just keep in mind, when you damage that coating, the damage might not be something you can fix. It might be irreversible. We're at the conclusion, right? The conclusion is that at the end of the day, the decision to use or not use a filter will be yours. It just depends on so many things that we talked about. It depends on your experience level, how you handle things, what kind of money you have in your wallet, because that's the truth. We have to talk about that, right? I mean, if you don't have a way of buying a $200 filter, then you're going to have some choices to make. Do I put a cheap filter on a really good lens? I don't know. Do I put a cheap filter on a cheap lens? You can do that. Or do I just keep the filter off altogether if it's a really good lens? That might be the case if you have soft hands and you know your way around the camera. And like we said, it depends on the quality of your gear, right? I mean, you don't have to go crazy thinking about all this stuff. If you bought a used lens for $100 and you're just trying to take some pictures to get familiar with composition, and you know, that's not a big worry for you right now. But if you're at this point where the lenses are costing upward of $2-3 grand a piece and the gear is good, then take care of it, right? And there are different ways to take care of it. I'm not saying that putting a filter on a lens is the only way, right? There are so many ways you can take care of a lens, but whatever you do, take care of it. I hope that this video sparked some thought, and you either weren't using a filter and now you're thinking about it, or you were and you're thinking about it. Whatever you decide to do, let me know in the comments, right? If this video switched your mind, or if it didn't switch your mind, if you're kind of adamant about what you're doing and you want to stay with that focus, then please let me know. Don't forget to give me a like and subscribe to the video. Please hit the little notification bell so that you get notifications when I drop new videos in every week. I love you guys. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it, and that's why I love you so much. I love being here with you, and I can't wait till the next video. Please take care of yourselves. drink your water, get plenty of sleep, and I'll see you in the next video. Ciao for now. Another one bites the dust.